Hey everyone. This story is based on a true story from Reddit. I didn't think much of it at first. Meeting her seemed like a chance to fill a quiet gap in my life, to help someone who had been through more than anyone deserves. We met by accident a year ago, an innocent conversation that, somehow, quickly grew deeper. She had a softness in her voice and a hesitant smile that hinted at some buried pain. Over time, she began sharing the pieces of her life, the dark parts she rarely let anyone see. Her past was a storm of struggle. She'd been hurt, even violated. It wasn't easy for her to let anyone close, to trust someone, much less a guy. She flinched at small gestures, at things others wouldn't think twice about, like a hand reaching across the table. I knew it would take time, and I was willing to wait. We fell into an easy friendship, one that felt fragile but oddly resilient. I never expected her to want anything more. Our connection had mostly been through messages, late-night calls, and sometimes she would call, and I'd listen for hours as she tried to work through her pain. I'd always been a bit old school about relationships, slow to trust, cautious with my heart. But this girl made me want to take the risk, even if only to be a steady rock in her life. The idea of a relationship, though, felt far off, something I never thought she'd want. Then one day, she told me. Quietly, in the simplest words, she said she wanted to be with me. It felt surreal. Here was this beautiful, haunted girl who had known only fear from men. And somehow, she felt safe with me. Against all odds, she convinced me to try. We both knew it would be tough. It was long distance, and her demons were always lingering. But I couldn't say no. I saw how hard she was trying, how she was fighting to heal, and I wanted to be the person to support her through that. Little did I know, this would be my biggest mistake. It started innocently enough, at least on the surface. I encouraged her to come to a city closer to me, where she was planning to join college. I thought it would be easier for us to see each other, to build something real and solid. But she seemed lost. Depression haunted her, pulling her down into dark, silent corners. I remember the late-night calls when she admitted she didn't feel like going on. I'd stay up, whispering words of hope, trying to remind her that life still had something left for her. I thought I was helping her, saving her from that darkness, or at least keeping her steady enough to find her way through it. For a while, I thought things were getting better. She seemed happier, began going out with friends, and her laughter started to return. She texted me about little victories, meeting new people, her grades improving, her small moments of happiness. I was thrilled, genuinely relieved, thinking I had helped her. But sometimes, in the quiet hours, a creeping doubt would slip into my mind, wondering if she needed me or if I was just a safety net she would abandon once she healed. I shook it off, clinging to the hope that love would be enough. Then last month, everything changed. The first sign came late one night. I was scrolling through my phone, half asleep, when I noticed her online status flickering on and off. It was almost midnight, and I knew she had an early class, so I wondered why she'd still be awake. I decided not to overthink it, but something just felt off. The following days were a strange mix of closeness and distance. Some days she was affectionate, saying how much she missed me and wanted to see me soon. Other days, she'd go hours without a word, and I'd tell myself she was just busy with school. It wasn't like I had any real reason to worry, but a gnawing feeling in my gut kept me on edge. I knew her past, her pain, and how she had trusted me with her deepest secrets. But that trust started to feel oddly fragile, as if it could vanish with the smallest breeze. Then, one afternoon, she accidentally let her guard down. We were video chatting, and she got a text. The way her eyes shifted to the side, how her lips pressed together for a second before she quickly swiped the notification away. It wasn't her usual self. Normally, she'd be relaxed, joking around with me, her guard down. But in that split second, something felt out of place. I asked her about it, lightly, hoping to brush off my own unease. She just laughed, told me it was nothing important, and quickly changed the subject. I let it slide, not wanting to seem controlling or paranoid. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. She'd been through so much, and here she was finally finding her footing, making friends, maybe even learning how to be happy. I didn't want to ruin that. Days passed, and the gap between us grew. Her responses to my texts slowed down, her calls grew shorter. She started canceling our video chats, saying she was too tired or swamped with assignments. I tried to be understanding, to tell myself that she was just busy, that this was a normal phase in a long-distance relationship. But doubt was slowly carving itself into my heart, making a home where trust had once been. Then I saw it. I was browsing through Instagram when I noticed her profile had been active. She hadn't posted anything new, but something compelled me to check her following list. There, mixed among her friends and classmates, were names I didn't recognize, guys I'd never heard her mention. I tapped through a few profiles, trying to reassure myself that these were just classmates, study group members, maybe friends of friends. But there was something about the captions on their posts, the comments she'd left here and there, little emojis, hearts, subtle replies that carried a weight I hadn't felt before. I was spiraling, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But as the days dragged on, that sinking feeling wouldn't let go. And then, one evening, while scrolling through Facebook, I stumbled on the proof I was hoping I'd never find. She'd left her likes visible on her page, and there was a string of heart reactions on a post I didn't recognize. Curiosity and fear got the better of me. I clicked on the post and found myself staring at a photo of her, laughing in some cafe with a guy I'd never seen before. The caption read, "Late nights with the best company," followed by a heart emoji. My heart clenched, my mind a storm of thoughts I couldn't make sense of. This was just a friend, right? It had to be. I tried to tell myself it was innocent, that she'd never betray me. But the way they looked at each other, the subtle lean, her hand resting on his, everything about the picture felt too close, too familiar. I wasn't in that picture. It was a glimpse into a world she hadn't invited me into, a life I wasn't a part of. I didn't confront her right away. I knew I'd be asking questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. Instead, I sank into a haze of confusion, clinging to a shred of hope that maybe I was just seeing things, that I was misinterpreting everything. After all, we'd been through so much together, she wouldn't just throw that away. After that night, every call felt forced, every text heavy with unsaid things. When we spoke, I kept my questions to myself, trying to keep the conversation light, but I could feel the distance growing with each passing day. She seemed guarded, almost evasive, as if there was something just beyond the screen that she didn't want me to see. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I kept reminding myself of all the moments we'd shared, the times she'd opened up to me like no one else. There was no way she would betray that trust. At least that's what I kept telling myself. A week later, I got the message that would shatter the last remnants of my peace. She texted me in the middle of the night, just a simple, "We need to talk." Those 4 words, as small as they were, hit me like a punch to the gut. I tried not to panic, telling myself that it might be about something else, maybe something about school or her past haunting her again. But deep down, I knew this was the conversation I'd been dreading. The call came, and her voice was softer than usual, almost as if she were tiptoeing around invisible landmines. She said she felt lost, that she needed space to figure things out. She spoke about how much she valued our friendship, our relationship, but how she'd been feeling overwhelmed and wasn't sure if she was ready to commit to anyone right now. Her words were vague, evasive, as if she were skirting around the real issue. And I, desperate for some semblance of control, kept trying to reassure her, telling her we could work things out, that I was willing to give her time. But then she said it. "There's someone else," she murmured, almost too quiet to hear. I sat there in stunned silence, unable to process the words. She continued, explaining that she'd met someone unexpectedly, that it hadn't meant anything at first, but somehow things had developed. I couldn't listen. My mind was racing, my heart pounding as I tried to make sense of the betrayal unfolding before me. This was the girl I had been there for, who I had supported through her darkest days. I had given her everything I had, without holding anything back. And now, she was telling me she'd thrown it all away for someone else. After what felt like hours of silence, I managed to speak. I asked her the questions that had been eating away at me. How long had this been going on? Did she love him? Did she even care about me anymore? Her answers were as vague as her explanations, half-hearted attempts to soften the blow. She told me it just happened, that she hadn't meant to hurt me, but that she felt something different with him, something she couldn't explain. I felt like I was suffocating, as if the walls were closing in around me. The reality of it hit me all at once. She had been with someone else, while I had been here, loving her, trusting her. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible, leaving a wound that felt raw and exposed. As we ended the call, she made a final, cruel request. She wanted us to stay friends, to keep talking, so we could work through this together. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the silence of my room. Friends. After everything she'd put me through, she expected me to stand by her side as if nothing had happened. But what tore me apart the most came 2 days later. I hadn't heard from her since that night, and I was still trying to process the pain, still hoping she might come to her senses, that she might realize the mistake she'd made. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from her. I opened it, expecting an apology, some sign of regret. But instead, it was a video, a short, shaky clip of her with him, laughing, kissing, wrapped in each other's arms. I felt my heart break all over again. It was as if she was rubbing salt in the wound, taunting me with the life she'd chosen without me. She knew how much I'd loved her, how much I'd sacrificed. Yet here she was, sending me proof of her betrayal, almost as if she enjoyed seeing me hurt. I couldn't understand it, couldn't fathom how someone I'd trusted with every piece of myself could be so heartless. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The hurt, the betrayal, the pain, they all twisted into something darker, something fierce. I was done being the one who cared too much, the one who gave without expecting anything in return. If she could hurt me like this without a second thought, then maybe it was time I stopped being the nice guy. That night, as I lay awake replaying her words and that video, a new resolve took root in me. I couldn't let her walk away unscathed. I had been there for her in ways no one else had. I had poured everything into our relationship, only for her to discard me and flaunt her betrayal. She had made a mockery of the trust I'd given her. Maybe it was time she felt a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. The idea of revenge came slowly, taking shape in the quiet hours as I lay in the dark, turning over memories of all the times I'd sacrificed for her, stood by her. I'd held her through her darkest nights, listened to her tears, helped her piece her life back together, only for her to turn around and shatter mine. And now she wanted to flaunt her new life in my face? That was a choice she would regret. I started small, drafting messages I'd never send, responses I'd never give, imagining the ways I could tear her down with words alone. But those thoughts, those satisfying, weren't enough. I wanted her to feel it, really feel it. I wanted her to realize that she'd destroyed the one person who would have stayed by her side through anything. I began to plan, to think of ways to turn her betrayal against her. My first step was to gather the details I needed. I had known enough of her life, her routines, and her new college friends to sketch a picture of her daily life. I created a fake profile on social media, one she'd be unlikely to suspect, posing as a new guy who shared her interests. It wasn't hard to lure her into talking. She loved attention, and she couldn't resist the allure of someone new showing interest. Before long, she was messaging him regularly, telling him things she used to tell me. It was a twisted satisfaction seeing her fall for it, like a predator unaware of the trap closing around it. Over the next few weeks, she shared more about her new life, unwittingly feeding me all the ammunition I needed. She didn't know it, but she was giving me every piece to break her. I found out about her classes, her new friends, even her schedules. I knew when she went out, when she stayed in, and more importantly, who she was with. With every message, every piece of information, I grew more certain of my plan. I started with something small, leaving anonymous messages about her to mutual friends, little rumors that would plant seeds of doubt in the minds of those around her. A whispered suggestion here, a question there. I knew she'd start to notice when people looked at her a little differently, asked odd questions, kept a bit of distance. She'd be confused, maybe a bit paranoid. It wasn't enough to ruin her life, but it was enough to unsettle her, to give her a taste of the isolation she had left me to face alone. But I wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. The final blow, the one I'd been carefully crafting in silence, was almost ready. I waited until I knew she was out with him one night, making sure she was distracted. Then, I took the video she'd so carelessly sent me, the one of her kissing him, and saved it to my phone. I carefully edited it, clipping it into a perfect loop of betrayal, and scheduled it to post on her social media from an anonymous account I created just for this purpose. And then I waited. The next morning, chaos erupted on her profile. The video, her cozying up with him, was all anyone could talk about. Her friends, her classmates, even her family. Everyone could see the truth she'd tried so hard to hide. She messaged me in a frenzy, begging me to take it down, to delete it, claiming she didn't know how it got out. She was frantic, scared, the control she'd tried so hard to maintain slipping through her fingers. I ignored her messages, each one a testament to the chaos she'd created in her own life. She'd tried to ruin me, to break me without a second thought, but now she was the one watching her world fall apart, helpless as her reputation crumbled. I felt a twisted satisfaction, a dark thrill watching her unravel under the weight of her own choices. For once, she was the one begging, the one at someone else's mercy. She kept calling, her voice pleading in voicemails, asking me to make it stop, promising anything if I'd just delete the video. But I knew better than to trust her. She hadn't cared about my pain, my sleepless nights, or broken heart. She had played her game without remorse, and now she was reaping the consequences. As I blocked her number, the final message she sent lingered on my screen, a desperate apology wrapped in hollow promises. I felt nothing. She had taken everything I'd given her, drained me of my kindness, and left me empty. I was done being her safety net, done caring for someone who had never truly cared for me. With one final tap, I deleted her contact, erasing her from my life as if she had never been there. It was over. After I blocked her, an eerie calm settled over me. The world seemed muted, quieter somehow. The ache that had gnawed at my chest was replaced with a strange emptiness. It was as though the fire of my anger had burned everything away, leaving nothing but quiet ash in its place. I was free from her, finally, but with that freedom came a hollow silence I hadn't expected. In the days that followed, I withdrew from social media, shut out the noise, and focused on myself. I threw myself into work, filling my days with tasks and projects, anything to distract me from the silence of my own mind. But the nights were harder. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the memory of her betrayal, of how I'd felt when I first saw that video, and how I'd watched her plead for mercy she'd never shown me. Oddly enough, I didn't regret what I'd done. She deserved it, every piece of the downfall she'd brought upon herself. But now that the storm had passed, I was left with nothing but the quiet echo of what had once been. I realized then that in avenging myself, I cut away a piece of who I used to be. The person I was before, the one who had loved her, who had stayed up late just to listen to her troubles, who had sacrificed so much to help her heal, that person was gone. There were moments when I'd reach for my phone out of habit, ready to share some small part of my day, only to remember that she was no longer there. She was gone from my life, erased like she'd never existed, and with her, the pieces of myself I had given to her had vanished too. It was a strange, surreal feeling, like grieving a ghost that no one else could see. One night, I decided to go through our old messages one last time. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe some clue that could explain how things had gone so wrong, or a reminder of who I used to be before all of this. The messages started innocently enough, full of laughter and warmth, little moments that had once meant everything to me. But as I scrolled, the words began to blur, the memories twisting into something painful and raw. I realized I couldn't keep holding on to the past, that if I wanted to move forward, I had to let her go completely. And so, I deleted everything. Her messages, her photos, every trace of her that had lingered in my phone. I erased it all, like wiping away the remnants of a bad dream. It felt final, irreversible, as though I were closing the door on a part of my life I would never revisit. And maybe that was for the best. In the weeks that followed, I struggled with the emptiness left behind. Without her to think about, to be angry with, I was left alone with myself, forced to confront the pieces of my life I had ignored for so long. I realized how much of myself I had given away, how I neglected my own happiness, my own dreams, in favor of trying to fix someone else's brokenness. I had poured so much of myself into her that, without her, I felt like a shell, barely able to recognize the person staring back at me in the mirror. I started journaling, writing down my thoughts in a desperate attempt to make sense of everything. Page after page, I poured out my anger, my sadness, my regret. I wrote about the love I had given her, the sacrifices I had made, the way I had let her take parts of me that I would never get back. It was painful, facing the truth of how much I'd lost, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I was being honest with myself, confronting the depths of my own vulnerability, my own need for love and acceptance. I realized that, in a way, I had loved her for all the wrong reasons. I had loved her not because she made me happy, but because I thought I could save her, that by healing her wounds, I could somehow heal my own. But that was a lie, a comforting illusion I had clung to in order to avoid facing my own pain. And now that illusion was gone, leaving me with nothing but the raw, unfiltered truth. I'd have to rebuild myself from scratch. It was a daunting thought, but also oddly empowering. I had survived the worst, and if I could survive that, then maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to move forward. Slowly, I began to pick up the pieces. I reconnected with old friends, started going out more, exploring the world that I had shut out in my grief. I found solace in the small things, the quiet moments that reminded me of who I was before all of this. I took up hobbies I'd long abandoned, finding comfort in the simplicity of doing things just for myself. It wasn't easy. There were still days when the memory of her would creep back in, a ghostly presence that lingered in the corners of my mind. But each time, the sting was a little less, the ache a little duller. I was learning to let go, to release the hold she had over me, one day at a time. Through this process, I discovered parts of myself I had forgotten, strengths I didn't know I had. I was resilient, capable of enduring the worst and still finding a way to stand. And with each step forward, I felt a little closer to the person I wanted to be, a person who didn't need anyone else to feel whole. Months passed, and the pain that had once felt all-consuming began to fade into a distant memory. I met new people, formed new connections, and started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that there was a future for me beyond the pain, beyond the betrayal. One evening, I found myself talking with someone who saw me, not as a broken man or a wounded heart, but as a person with his own dreams, his own passions. She was kind, understanding, and she listened in a way that felt genuine, without judgment or pity. For the first time since my breakup, I felt the stirrings of something new, a quiet spark that reminded me that love was still possible. I wasn't ready to dive into anything serious, but the possibility was there, a glimmer of light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. I realized that healing didn't mean erasing the past, but rather learning to live with it, to carry it as a part of my story without letting it define me. As I stood on the threshold of this new chapter, I felt a sense of closure, a peace that had once seemed impossible. I had been through hell and back, faced betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, but I had emerged stronger, more resilient, ready to face whatever life had in store. I no longer felt the need for revenge, nor did I carry the weight of regret. I had made my peace with what had happened, accepted the scars that would always be there as a reminder of the love I had once given so freely. But those scars no longer defined me. They were simply a part of my journey, a testament to the strength I had found within myself. Looking back, I realized that, in a strange way, her betrayal had given me the gift of self-discovery, forcing me to confront the parts of myself I had buried for too long. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that I was ready to embrace it, ready to love again, not out of a need to heal someone else, but because I had finally learned to love myself. And in that newfound self-love, I found a strength that no one could ever take away. Bye-bye.